Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. I am Cory Morgan. This is my weekly show with the Western Standard, going out to a number of channels out there. Get my opinion on things, run through some news items, maybe a little ranting and raving. And of course, I always have some fantastic guests coming on. So I've got a good guest coming on today as usual. Her name is Gabrielle Bauer, and she's from Toronto. She's a health and medical writer, and she put out a book that was published by the Brownstone Institute called Blindsight is 2020. So she's been looking back on the pandemic policies, social aspects to it, and well, what worked, if anything, and what failed. And there's plenty of that. So, I mean, we can't let that go too far in the rearview mirror. We got to examine what happened and why there. So, let's get on to other things, local things. Of course, the election finally ended in Alberta. What a long, ugly, nasty campaign that was. In the end, we do have a UCP government. Danielle Smith pulled it off, but I got stuck with an NDP MLA. Shamefully, in my rural riding, I have an NDP MLA. I'm quite bummed about it, but whatever. I guess it could have been worse. We could have had a whole whack more of them. Good to see you all checking in on the comment scroll, guys. Stuart, Shirley, Jason, all the rest of you. I appreciate it. Use the comment scroll if you're watching this live. Send questions my way, the guests' way, and, converse with each other. Just keep things civil. We can fight on Twitter if we want. We don't need to do it in this comment scroll. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about that election, offer my advice, and I'm sure she's getting it from all directions. My advice, though, to Premier Danielle Smith. So Danielle Smith, I mean, she's gone against all conventional wisdom and political advice. She's defied and ignored polls, pundits, and academics that all predicted her political demise, and in dismissing those naysayers, she's found herself elected as Alberta's premier with a majority government at her disposal, albeit a reduced one. Now, the night of the election, Danielle Smith invoked the late Ralph Klein in referencing what was called his miracle on the prairie, and she wasn't drawing an unfair parallel. The similarities between the 1993 general election won by Klein and the 2023 election in Alberta are remarkable when you look at them. When Klein took the reins of the Progressive Conservative Party in the early 1990s, their party was in serious trouble. It was polling down sometimes as low as 20% against Lawrence Decor's Liberals, and many were declaring the PCs as electorally dead in the water. The elites, of course, and the chattering classes dismissed Klein as an uneducated bumpkin who stumbled his way into the premiership and would become little more than a footnote in political history. Voters, though, they felt otherwise and gave Ralph Klein a reduced majority government on June 15th, 1993. The Alberta establishment, of course, they were aghast, but at least somewhat humbled. Now we come all the way up to 2022, and we've got the governing UCP, and they were polling as low as 22% under the leadership of Jason Kenney. That led to the end of Kenney, and among a number of things. And when Kenney was replaced by Danielle Smith, the usual establishment suspects were all but confident this would be the beginning of the end of the UCP's reign in government. There's no way a leader with such a controversial history as Smith could turn around the fortunes of a party in such trouble, right? Well, Smith proved her detractors wrong and pulled a reduced majority win from what was the most personal and negative provincial campaign in living memory. And while she may have fewer seats than the 1993 PCs did under Klein, she actually has a larger segment of popular support. I mean, Ralph Klein won 44.5% support in 1993. Smith's UCP took 52.6% of the electorate. Her opponents can no longer claim she doesn't have a mandate from Albertans. Now, if Premier Smith wants to continue down a Klein-like path, she needs to take another one of his favorite sayings to heart. Don't blink. The election might be behind Smith right now, but her opponents are far from gone. Notley's remaining as the leader of the NDP for now, which ensures the negative tone of the opposition against Smith is going to continue. Legacy media is as biased as ever against Smith, and they're going to pan every move she makes. Just the other morning, I listened to a local talk radio station begin its newscast saying Notley's NDP wins the largest opposition ever. Since when is the second place celebrated in a two-party system? A two-party system. They won't even give Smith a win in headlines when she just had a literal win. I mean, you mentioned that the NDP won the largest opposition after you mention the UCP won a majority, but not in the media environment of today. Unions, academics, and media will all oppose Smith's every move, just as they did with Klein. There's going to be people within Smith's own party, they're going to get nervous. And as her opposition to her policy starts mounting, they're going to put pressure on her. She needs to ignore her opponents and reassure her allies. Most of all, though, again, she can't blink. Klein was counseled to back down as he put Alberta's finances back in order. He was told by the experts he was moving too far, too fast. He was upsetting the apple cart, and surely he'd be punished at the polls. He didn't blink, though, and political pundits assured us he'd be punished dearly in the next election. Well, in 1997, Ralph Klein increased his majority with another 11 seats on top of that and took 51% of the popular vote. Ignore the experts, don't blink. Smith has a mandate, and she needs to pursue it. She can't succumb to the temptation to pull the political reform Band-Aid off slowly through minor incremental policy changes. For one thing, her opponents are going to go wild no matter what she does, even if they're minor changes. So you got nothing to lose in going for the big ones. Secondly, that's how Jason Kenney tried to govern, and look how well that turned out. Albertans are willing to embrace positive political changes, even if it comes to the health system and the pension plan. Smith needs to bring about these reforms quickly and to offer no quarter to her opponents in her work. Changes need to be made in the first 2 years in power so the results can be measured in the second 2 years before she faces the electorate again. She can't let the civil servants, union heads, or even her own advisors slow roll her mandate. Hesitation will be her undoing. Premier Smith isn't showing any indications of being a shrinking violet in office. I don't expect her to tiptoe around with policy. I mean, Smith's historical biggest mistake ever, though, was to crumble under strong headwinds and led the disastrous floor crossing from the Wild Rose Party to the Progressive Conservatives under Prentice in 2014. The pressure got to her back then, and she sought an escape hatch. Now, Danielle Smith has been given a second political life that nobody would have expected of her for her after that catastrophic lapse in judgment in 2014. She's clearly learned a lot since then. Let's hope, though, she's absorbed the most important lesson of all, especially when you're getting tired of swimming upstream. Don't blink. That's all I can offer for Premier Smith right now. I mean, like I said, she's getting advice all over the place from all sorts of quarters. But, stick to your plan. Don't let them push you off it because you won't win. They just see the weakness. They'll smell the blood in the water, and they will keep coming after her. All right, let's see what else is going on in the news and check in with Dave Naylor, our news editor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
I don't know, Cory. I think I'm going to need your help in the next week. I think I'm suffering from PWS.
PWS?
Poll withdrawal syndrome. We used to get 4 or 5 polls a day who was going to win the election, and now for 2 days we've had none. I can't deal with it, Cory. I mean, where's my polls? Anyways, thank goodness the election's over.
The old ones, yeah.
Thank goodness the election's over. News-wise, busy morning as always at the Western Standard. Leading off the site right now is bad news for the oil patch. Massive Norwegian oil company has not pulled the plug, but has delayed the massive Bay du Nord project off the coast of Newfoundland for at least 3 years. That's a $16 billion project that is now on hold, Cory. Our education columnist, John Hilton O'Brien, has filed a piece on the fact that even though the UCP has won, the parents still need to fight for what's happening in the education system. I don't know about you, Cory, but when I was growing up, there was nothing I liked more than a Duke of Hazzards episodes with the following the tales of Bo and Luke Duke and their very Daisy Duke short friend Daisy. Car chases and whatnot, they were all part of life in the Dukes of Hazzards, and there was a real life one recently down in Georgia, which was caught on tape, which some driver flew off the back of a pickup truck and went hundreds of meters or hundreds of feet in the air, barrel rolling. So that's good fun to check out. Our education. Oh, and there's Nico playing it there for you now. What else do we have? Our real estate expert, Mike Thomas, has got a piece looking at the June 7th Bank of Canada interest rate. Interestingly, the GDP that is higher than expected could cause the bank to raise the rate on June 7th. And we've got also video of the dramatic incident yesterday involving a Chinese fighter jet, which buzzed right in front of an American aircraft, and that's up there for you to see. And coming up in a few minutes, Cory will have a story. We'll reveal who becomes Hollywood's oldest dad lately. which Hollywood legend has just become a dad at 83 years old? We'll have that story up in just a couple minutes.
All right. Well, thank you for the updates, Dave. And we're looking forward to the full story on the geriatric breeder there.
Yeah. And he, if he's doing it at 83, you have any thoughts of maybe, getting back in the baby making game?
No, I got neutered back when I was 27, and there's no reversing that for me. But maybe some others might want to take up the challenge later on.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, Dave. We'll
Thanks, Cory.
talk after the show. That is our news director, Dave Naylor, again, covering everything from the important to the fun and trivial, such as celebrity child birth and Dukes of Hazzard style crashes going on. But also, of course, we're covering the election, federal politics, provincial politics, like any good large news site. This is when I remind everybody, get on there and take out a subscription. That's how we stay independent. That's how we pay the bills. That's how, again, most important of all, we aren't beholden to the government for a nickel. We do not take any tax dollars. And that's thanks to you guys who have subscribed. $9.99 a month, $99 a year. You get full access, get beyond the paywall, and see all of those news stories as they come out. But we've got a large news crew across the country here putting stuff out. I mean, it's one of the things that came out recently, or as we saw during the election, Calgary has next to nothing left with Canada, with the Calgary Sun and the Calgary Herald for newspapers. These were the two heavyweights here. They were here, forever. They had they couldn't file their stories until quite late because they don't have any copy editors apparently out this way. They're down to putting out just about a flyer. I saw somebody on Twitter talking about that today too. Yesterday's Sun, a post-election Calgary Sun, it was like 24 pages long and had 2 ads. They're hurting really bad. And I'm not celebrating. There's a lot of good jobs being lost. We got a lot of challenges to local coverage going on. Actually, we've got who is going to cover these things. The news is important, but they've got to change how they're doing things rather than trying to keep asking for more and more money to shore up what's a broken, obsolete system. You can't carry the weight of an old traditional style media outlet any longer. I mean, that's why the Standard's expanding as well as it is, and other independent outlets, because we started from scratch and we didn't have to try and carry all that weight and reinvent the wheel. We're working with modern types of technology and layouts and ways to source stories, edit stories and get them out there. And that's why we put out a lot of them, and we can put them out fast, and they're quality. But there was a council, some meeting of, this is a crisis of local news is a really harsh reality. This was to Canadian media directors at a conference recently that was held. And you see, they understand it. And they say the decline of local news outlets is deeply concerning. Not only does it disrupt the lives of journalists and industry professionals, but has far-reaching implications for the communities. And there's truth to it. But I mean, we got to remember, do we need that many outlets anymore? Do we need the local ones? I mean, for those of us old enough to remember pre-internet days, if you were living in a small town or a large city, even the local little baseball team, where else could you find out if they won or lost if you weren't at the game yourself than opening the local paper, or what was it with that house fire down the street, or any number of these smaller news items. But now you can still find out. It didn't disappear. It's just the local news outlets did. So you can go on Facebook and you can find these things, you can go on Twitter. I mean, part of the problem though, and I've said that before too, we've got more access to quick, ready information than we've ever had in our lives. But at the same time, we've got more access to BS as well. So that's where we've got to be really, really careful. And, we got to sift. I mean, some of it puts the responsibility on our laps. So we do have to take that responsibility and just make the most of it. But again, I mean, we can't use that as an excuse to shore up unsustainable media models. It's a time of the past. So we've got to evolve and evolve upwards. So, okay, I see my guest is getting set over there. We're going to have her on deck right away. And as I said, her name is Gabrielle Bauer. She's a health and medical writer. She's won some awards. She's written a number of books. And we are going to predominantly speak, and I've been looking forward to this, on her recent one on the pandemic and responses to it. It's called Blindsight is 2020, and it was published by the Brownstone Institute just a few months ago. So let's bring her in and have a conversation about this. There we go. Hello, Ms. Bauer. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, I mean, I guess I'll get right into it. The book is talking about hindsight. It's, I guess, a review. It's looking at what the responses were, how we reacted to the pandemic, how governments reacted, people reacted, and I guess maybe if you could kind of sum up in a nutshell what you're covering in this book.
Okay, I've read a lot of pandemic books as part of my research. This one is a little bit different in that it really focuses on the psychological, sociological dimension. So it's not as much about, data, this fact or that fact, although there certainly are some of those, but it's, why did the world go mad? What happened? Why was there this level of fear? Why was there this level of groupthink? Why was there this level of shaming and snitching? And where did that all come from? And so, in order to make my case, I don't just talk about my own views, but I enlist the expertise of 46 people from various disciplines, not just science. And that's really important because I think, novelists and artists and lawyers and philosophers, they all have really important things to say about a pandemic. So I bring together all these people, including scientists, and through them, I make the case for some of what happened and why it did.
Yeah, and I mean, it was at 46 dissenting thinkers, I believe, is what you've got listed in that book who have come out, and we can't dismiss the people on the grounds, the musicians, the novelists. I mean, they've traditionally been part of our social fabric. They've put out social trends from their periods of observation historically, and it's very important to hear what they say, not just the fella in the lab coat in the back of a room somewhere. And I mean, as you said, it was almost a temporary madness the world went into. I mean, we'll be studying this for a long, long time, but I mean, now at least we're allowing some of the voices to come out and even talk about it. I mean, that was part of the trend. Everybody was being shouted down if they swam against the current.
I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I'm 66 years old now, so I'm old enough to be a grandma, although I'm not one yet. And I was 63 when this all started. And so, but I never, even though you'd think I might be in a demographic that wanted to stay home and say, stay safe, no, never. That never made sense to me. And in fact, I could not understand why my friends and colleagues and family were so on board with this. I could not understand it, and it troubled me mightily. And the first few weeks, I tried to sort of understand this and start some conversations online, and the degree of outrage and vitriol I received, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, no one had called me a sociopath before, or a mouth-breathing Trump tart, or, people telling me to go lick the virus. I mean, it was unbelievably toxic,
And it was damaging, and I mean, I think everybody's sort of seen it. I hope some are looking back shamefully, but some rifts haven't been healed. I've seen that within some aspects of my extended family, a couple of siblings who couldn't talk with each other over the period of this because they were on different sides of the vaccination and masking issue. Like, we shouldn't have a political issue ripping apart tight family units. Well, it's not a political issue. It shouldn't have turned political. And that's something that's interesting, too, was the left-right divide. I mean, you'd think this was all just based on health and data, but there was a very distinct split between people who were traditionally, I guess, leaned towards conservative views and people who weren't.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I do want to address one thing you said. You'd think it would all be about the science and data. One of the points that has always been important to me and that I make in the book is that managing a pandemic is never just about science and data. No matter which side of the divide you're on, there's always values that go into it. And in a chapter on kids and schools, I talk about that. How important is it to the society for children to go to school? There are no formulas to tell us when to close schools and when not to. It's always going to be a value judgment. I mean, data can inform that value judgment, but it's never just a question of the science, so to speak, no matter how good the science is. So, and yes, as far as the political divide, and that's another issue that I address in the book, about this ridiculous left-right thing, because traditionally the left has really paid attention to the working class and the struggles and the need to earn a living and a dignified living and all that stuff, and that completely went out the window. And there are so many people like myself that I have met through all this that came from perhaps a more left-leaning background and just got thoroughly disillusioned with the left over the past 3 years and now find ourselves politically homeless. I mean,
Well,
We've come to appreciate some things from the right, but we still are kind of in this no man's land.
And we socially disrupted an entire generation at some of their most formative periods. I mean, the fear and the division and some of the things imprinted upon children when the schools were shut down and so much fear was being spread around. And even when the numbers were coming in, I can understand some panic in the early part of a crisis. Okay, we don't know how this is going to move. We don't know who it's going to hurt. We really want to act and see if we can't get under control. But I mean, after a year, we had a pretty good idea that thankfully children were virtually immune from harm from this virus. But even then, we couldn't get them back into the schools. We had hazard tape going around playgrounds. We wouldn't let them get outdoors and socialize. And that's going to affect them for the rest of their lives.
Yes, and to add to that, all the guilt that we lay on them, that was another thing that just really disturbed me from the start, is this idea of telling children, well, don't do XYZ or else you might kill grandma. Well, no, I mean, if you inadvertently transmit a virus to someone, you're not killing anyone. Of course, we try to be careful and we don't do these things on purpose, but humans and viruses have coexisted since the beginning of time. You cannot make a child feel guilty for inadvertently doing something that is just biology. So I found that outrageous, and I think that really affected a lot of children, and I'm still hearing about it today, where they just, oh my God, if I take off my mask, who am I going to kill? It's just crazy stuff. It really was like the world. It's the title of one book that I quote in my own book, The Year the World Went Mad, by an epidemiologist, a mainstream epidemiologist. And that is in fact what happened. The world went mad, I believe, for 3 years.
Without doubt, and rationality went out the window, and so many things that we can't take back. We had family members who might be passing away of something that is clearly terminal. Nothing is going to save them. The most important thing in the last period of their lives is to try and see some loved ones one more time before they go. And we kept loved ones out. Who cares if you're going to give them an infection of COVID when they're going to die of cancer in a week? They just want to hold somebody's hand one more time. And we denied them that.
It just amazed me that people lost sight of that, and that is a theme that I return to a lot in the book. What are we here for? And what do we want in the last moments of our lives? Do we want to be, protected from humanity, or do we want to reach out and sort of look over our lives and think and connect and make memories? It was such a monolithic response. There's these epidemiologists with their hammers just looking for this one nail, and that is probably the central theme in the book, is that this is not just an epidemiological problem. It's a human problem that has mental health dimensions, social dimensions, spiritual, philosophical dimensions, and the response just swept all that aside, which really went against all previous pandemic guidance. And that's why I enlist even the thoughts of a comedian, some musicians, several novelists. I found that novelists often had the deepest insights about the pandemic. Obviously they can't advise us on virology or transmission patterns, but they can tell us a lot about sort of the philosophy of managing a pandemic and what needs to be done and what shouldn't be done.
Well, and these things matter. I mean, the distrust in the entire system and authority in general. I mean, we were ill-used, or a lot of us certainly feel we were. And if an emergency comes down the road, I imagine there's always another one coming. There's going to be a lot of people resisting, perhaps resisting on the wrong side, but they've just lost so much trust in the authorities and the establishment that they won't listen to them when the time comes that they probably should.
Well, that's right. And I didn't see any sense of restraint. It was always, great overreach. I didn't see any sense of restraint. Oh, well, things are looking better. Let's pull back now. Let's talk. Let's bring in some expertise from other areas. And of course, we all know, the insane push toward vaccines is the only solution. Now, I'm vaccinated myself. I'm boosted. Like, I personally didn't have an issue with the vaccines. I worried about the vaccines as little as I worried about the virus, which might seem strange to some people, but it's how I'm built. So it wasn't an issue for me personally. But as the months went on in 2021, 2022, and I just saw how insane the vax wars became. A lot of us remember that cover spread on the Toronto Star. with quotes from the people who wanted, the anti-vaxxers to die and go to hell and wanted their children to die. And I mean, like, what is this? That just seemed far, far more harmful to me than any virus. And one thing that I guess I take pride in is that, although I got vaccinated myself, I resolved very early on that I was never going to question or shame anyone for their decision, because I trust that my friends who decided not to get vaxxed have good reasons for it. And so I never asked them. I never made socializing contingent on it. And it became also clear very soon that the vaccine was not stopping transmission, which really removed any ethical justification for the mandates. So I just didn't get into any of that. So many of my friends, are you vaccinated? Are you not? And I remember meeting a friend who was not vaccinated, and we were walking outside, and she burst out crying in the middle of our walk. I described this episode in the book, and she just said she was so afraid of meeting me because she thought maybe that I wouldn't want to hang out with her once I found out she wasn't vaxxed. We were outside walking, I just thought, wow.
Yeah, and then another aspect that turned into almost a bizarre measure of, I think, to a degree, virtue signaling, maybe began with some medical rationale, but was masking. I think part of it's because you wear a mask, you're showing your visible effort that you're trying to stop this, despite the fact that it was showing that it wasn't doing a heck of a lot to stop anything, but it was annoying the heck out of people. It was dividing people. And again, it just came down to, I think, a symbolic thing of just showing authority and pushing down on people.
Absolutely. And as you say, virtue signaling. And I have to admit, I have a little bit of an allergy to that, the holier than thou. Look at me, I'm a good person, and that was so much a part of this. So I've written quite a lot about masks. Like, if anyone looks online, they'll find a lot of my articles about masks. Because ultimately one of my most recent ones was it's really not even so much about the data. You go on Twitter, and you're going to see these endless arguments. Masks work. No, they don't. Yes, they do. No, they don't. Yes, they do. No, they don't. And both sides just fling data at each other and stats and studies and all that. Underlying all this, I firmly believe, and have from the start, is really a difference in worldview. And the side that just believes that protection from a certain threat, from a biological threat, trumps everything else in life, that side is going to justify masking. They're going to interpret a 5% reduction as, well, it's worth it, even if it's a 1% reduction, whatever it takes. The side that sees humanity in what I call a more holistic way and sees safety from a biological hazard as only one dimension, and who also appreciates human connection and in that holistic way is going to resist the idea of a perma-masked society. And so that's why I've always believed that there are what I call data agnostic arguments behind all this. There's just two sides that see the world a little differently and that want a different kind of world. And my book sort of argues for side B. This is the kind of world that we want, and this is why.
Yeah, and the battles, unfortunately, are still going on. But I mean, part of what we can hope for, the most we can hope for, is that we learn from it and correct some of our past actions the next time we hit a challenge. So, I mean, that's part of, I guess, what you kind of go through and come towards in the book. We've kind of run out of time, but where then, I see at the Brownstone Institute, you have plenty of columns there. Where can people find copies of Blindsight is 2020, along with your other books?
Well, you can always go on my website, GabrielleBauer.com. And all the information is there. Blindsight is 2020. Brownstone Institute is a nonprofit, so the book is available through all Amazon stores, on Lulu as well. So it's very easy to find. You just Google the book, Google my name. You can find ways to order the book. If anyone speaks Spanish, it has also been published in Spanish by a Madrid publisher. So all that's available on my website and just by Googling my name.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you for writing that. We really need to examine what we've done to ourselves and try to do better in the future. And this book's an important part of that. And thank you for coming on today to share part of that with us.
Well, I thank you.
All right. Well, I hope we get the chance to talk again soon. I'm certain there'll be more to discuss.
Okay. Thanks, Cory.
Hey, thank you. So that was Gabrielle Bauer or Bauer, I should say. I'm terrible with the reading on there. And the book again is Hindsight or Blindsight is 2020. And again, yes, it can be found at brownstone.org. There's connections, Amazon, all over. We really need critical discussion of what happened. We need to look in that rearview mirror and scratch our heads. And hopefully, some people are letting some of those shields down a little bit. We've got to watch it too. What I've hated the most, what I've despised seeing was the social division. The people who got so upset and fought and haven't talked with each other since, well, it doesn't matter if the other person wanted you to mask or vaccinate. If you can get over it and start talking again, it's worth it, okay? Let it get behind us. We can discuss the other things. We can fight about other stuff later. But seeing lasting damage, seeing families split, seeing friendships lost, social circles broken, you can't measure these things. And that's part of what was important with this book, with talking to artists, comedians, people, though, who observe the social aspects of us, because you can't clinically measure social damage. There's no easy way to do that. So you can't get a list and see just what happened to that family over there, or that sports team, or those friends from school. But there was damage, a lot, and with so little benefit. And that's, I think, a lot of what was lost in this whole thing too. Gabrielle kind of covered a little of that at the end, talking about, if the masks helped with 1% or 5%, somebody could come up with some data to say it helps. Okay, fine, fair enough, if you're reducing it a little. But everything comes with a cost. And when it comes to cost-benefit analysis, we threw the cost part out the window. There is a cost to wearing a mask. There's the social aspect. I mean, some of it's just somebody saying, I don't want it on my face. Well, you have to respect a little bit of that. That's important. I myself, and as my wife will remind folks, that I'm supposed to have hearing aids. I don't have good hearing. I've really, during the pandemic, discovered just how much I come to rely on seeing person's lips move when they speak to me. And when they're behind a mask, I'm asking them to speak up a lot. Now, imagine somebody who was fully hearing impaired. What was that 3 years like for them? For what benefit? To protect them from a 1% or 5%, a little less of catching, again, a virus which was definitely real and definitely dangerous, but to most people, not so much that perhaps it was worth the cost of imposing the masks. And the other part that was thrown out was any concept of bodily autonomy or individual choice. You have to respect somebody else's choice, even if you disagree with it. You can even yell at them to disagree, but don't have the state step down and get on them. People got on my case, so I remember that during the show, and it's bad on both sides. I've never hesitated to point out that I got vaccinated twice as well, but I've always supported choice. And yes, I don't see coercion as choice. Because, there's some people saying, well, you never were forced to. Yeah, no, it's as long as you're willing to lose your job, lose your ability to travel, lose your ability to go to a restaurant, you lose your ability to be on sporting teams, have post-secondary education, it's your choice. That's not a realistic choice for a lot of people. And when we talk about bodily autonomy, and I'll throw in the hand grenade when it comes to it, if it's a choice that really, why can't an employer say who has deep-seated feelings about abortion say, well, you know what? I want to have access to the medical records of my employees, and any who've participated in abortion, I want the right to fire them. It was a choice, and there's consequences, right? Choices have consequences. Now, that employer would be brought up in front of a human rights commission so fast your head would spin if they pulled that. I don't want to see something like that, of course, but that's what I'm talking about. That whole principle it's very personal. Somebody who strongly feels that they should not be vaccinated, that's none of the employer's business, particularly once it was clear that it didn't stop transmission. There was no more moral argument anymore. He wasn't going to make coworkers sick by not being vaccinated, wasn't putting anybody at risk. Why do you still have the gun to that person's head? And there's still some places doing that. It's absurd. It's wrong. And I know people are almost sick of hearing of it. It was a horrible period of time for everybody. And we don't want to talk about it, but we can't forget about it. We can't stop talking about it because, as I said, there's going to be another crisis. There always is. So all we can do is hope that we do better in the next one. So let's learn from the last one. What did we do wrong? Let's not repeat those mistakes. We can make a whole bunch of new mistakes when the next crisis comes. But we've got to study these things and we can't let them go. All right, I'm going to move on to some other news items to cover some things. As I said, I can only handle so much COVID talk after so many years of it. It's so important, but I can only take on so much per session. Let's sort of lighten things up, but interesting when it comes to individual choice. This ties in. We had a plebiscite that was held during the Alberta election down in southern Alberta in the town of Cardston. Now, people not familiar with Alberta, we have a very strong Mormon population in a lot of those southern towns, Cardston, McGrath, Raymond, predominantly Mormon individuals living down there. And Cardston has not allowed liquor sales for over 100 years in that town. So they finally, you can't get a drink anywhere. You can't go to a bar. You couldn't get go to a liquor store because they could use the ability of, local business licenses. So booze wasn't banned, but you had to go elsewhere to get it. You couldn't get it anywhere. And it was still close. 491 people voted, 53% of them to say, yes, we should allow some liquor sales, to 441 who voted no. We'll see. It depends on who's on the town council and whether they'll drag their feet and still allowing and giving licenses. But this again comes down to why, guys? Why? It's a legal product. If you're not into it, your faith says you shouldn't drink it, so on, then don't. But don't use the arm of the law, the state, to stop other people from having that choice. It's ridiculous. And even to this day, it gets too far. Go door to door. We know the Latter-day Saints certainly have no shyness about that. Try to create converts and get people to choose not to drink. I'm not one who's saying that excess booze use and liquor is a good idea. I've had my challenges with alcohol. I haven't had a drink in years, but it's not good for everybody, that's for sure. But I don't begrudge somebody else from responsibly enjoying it. If you can go out and enjoy a drink or a few, or even go on a bender now and then, have some fun with it, go to town responsibly. It's not for me, that's all. But we as a society, we've got to get better at that, don't we? Got to get better at being able to say, I'm not into this. This other person's into this. I just won't do it with them. I'm okay with it, though. I don't have to stop them. I don't have to intervene on them. It gets back to the libertarian principles. If it's not hurting somebody else, stay out of it, particularly the state. Now, some people, and fair enough, I'm going to go on one of my sidetrackings because that's what I do. When we talk about decriminalization of hard drugs, fair enough. If you're saying that way, Cory, why are you on the case of it, so much as it's happening in Vancouver? Well, that's a fair question. Very much a fair one. Part of the problem, and I do believe to a degree in decriminalizing, going after the ground level consumers of drugs, even the hard ones, what point? What point in arresting and finding a heroin or a fentanyl junkie that has no money, that are really at bottom already, and going after them? You're not doing them any good. You're not doing the state any good. You're not stopping the dealers. You're not stopping the mayhem that the drugs are causing. The problem I have is with the enablement, with the trying to say that you can functionally live and exist on drugs, because those drugs aren't directly comparable to alcohol. Now, alcohol, as I know, can be very, very dangerous. It can be abused. It's ruined millions of lives for some people who can't responsibly consume it. But there's no responsible way to be a recreational consumer of fentanyl. Way too powerful, way too addictive, way too damaging. There is no safe amount of methamphetamines you can take. Meth is not safe. Putting a rail to blow up your nose is never a good, healthy idea. Should it be illegalized, though? That's not necessarily the route to deal with it. But what we need is treatment. What we need is intervention. And that gets into another area that, people could say is a double standard. I've talked about that. We need to, when people have hit that point, we do have that. And I talked about it with a family member I had to deal with recently. When a person is clearly in a position where they may harm themselves or others, we can intervene, and that's under the Mental Health Act. Every province has one. When a person is taking fentanyl to the point that they're scrawny and have sores all over them and have lost bowel control and are passing out behind dumpsters, I don't think it should be that hard to be making the case that they're going to harm themselves if we just leave them as they are. It's one of those rare cases where infringing on individual liberty, I think, is a social obligation on our part. We have to be careful with it. You don't want to do it frivolously, but we should see enough of the zombies on the streets. Those are somebody's children's, cousins, brothers, sisters, I mean, somebody put it in the most crude of ways in some of the online discussions with someone saying, you can't take their liberty. What if it's your daughter out there who's servicing men to get her next fix? Would you as a family member want some sort of intervention to get her off there? Even if treatment is difficult and doesn't have the highest success rate, you know that leaving it on the street has pretty much a 0 success rate. Wouldn't you want to intervene? If it's your son who's out there, who's putting his life at risk, stealing from people to get his next fix, pacing up and down the roads, begging on street corners. So yes, that's compassionate conservatism. We got to be careful with it. And others have pointed out, yes, these addicts they don't have personal liberty. They don't have freedom. They are slaves to the addiction. They're slaves to the drugs. They don't have the liberty already. So this is one of the things I'm very excited about with Premier Smith, because she didn't back down on that. And that's part of what I said at the start of it, when she was talking about bringing in treatment systems where we're going to directly intervene and get them in. And I've seen some experts and others are saying, there's only a 20% success rate if you force treatment, 50% if they come in willingly. The bottom line is treatment's essential. When you're in the late stages of addiction, not just trying it out, when you're one of those, again, when you're on the streets, when you're a meth addict, a fentanyl addict, a heroin addict, your odds of surviving without treatment are very, very low. So even 20% is a hell of a lot better than what you had. And I want to try it. People point to Portugal. Look at them. They've decriminalized the drugs and everything. Yes, they have, but they overlook the other part. Portugal has a very, very advanced, and I would say, yes, almost coercive treatment system. You want to get in and get access to some of that clean supply. Yes, but they also say this is also the first step on your road to getting treatment and getting off the crap. It's not saying you can live and just keep consuming it. It's a disease that needs to be treated, not something that needs to be enabled. So, as others have been pointing out with the Aaron Gunn's documentary, Canada is Dying. Yes, I think it's well worth watching. And we have our own Arthur Green, who's always putting pictures up of addicts in rough states and in difficulty on the streets. And people get upset with that. And they should. That's the point. We want you to get upset. But it's not just to get you upset. It's to make people realize how ugly it's getting out there, how bad it is, how much worse it is. Because most people don't go downtown. Most people don't ride public transit. So most people don't understand just how awful it's gotten. And this is happening in every city and also in the smaller towns and areas across the entire country. Fentanyl, it's like something we've never seen before. It's so much, it's prevalent, it's relatively cheap, it's incredibly powerful, very, very dangerous. And we didn't have to deal with that. In the 80s, the 90s, we had addicts, you had your drunkards, you always had that part of town, but you didn't have this wave of zombies that's killing people like this. And we have to do something about it. Enabling isn't working. And again, it just gets down to responsible or not. It's not a good recreational drug. When I, as many pointed out, shared too much when talking about my colonoscopy, for example, part of what they gave me as the mix to knock it out, to make it a less unpleasant experience, was fentanyl. There is a medical use for it, but it doesn't mean that a person can take it themselves in a safe manner in any sort of way. And it certainly gave me an impression of just how powerful that stuff is. Because, the little bit injected into me, and I barely remembered anything, and they're wheeling me out of the room a little more humbled and a little tender in the backside, but no worse for wear. All right, well, enough of that. Let's turn the page onto something quite different and talk to Jim Boozicum of Marketplace Commodities and get some updates on things. We're starting to see a drought starting to intensify, and people are starting to get concerned. Before the last time I talked to Jim, there you are. You were saying, producers shouldn't be sweating the weather patterns quite yet, but now is it starting to entrench a bit?
Yeah, so we're roughly about 1 month into the North America growing season. That's both here in Western Canada and most of the United States. So while some areas have been getting more or less regular precipitation, we've also seen areas like southern Alberta, eastern side of Alberta, actually become drier. The conditions when they were planting the crops was good. They had, plenty of moisture to germinate the crops, but now that those crops are growing, they require more moisture to mature properly to produce the seeds. And we're starting to hear some rumbles about, production issues if this weather keeps up the way it is. So it's very common. I mean, we do go through most growing seasons where it's there's always imperfections, there's always issues, and these things affect the markets. So what we have seen, though, is that we had really high prices in 21, 22, and even the start of 23, and these markets are actually continuing to go down. So one might ask, well, what's going on? Like usually if you have a drought situation and you have potential production issues, you should actually see prices start to react to that and go up. Well, I think the issue is today it's still too localized. The trade, as you might want to call it, or those that are speculating on the markets, are saying, look, we're not buying it yet. It's still too small of a drought. So it depends what happens for sure as we go into the next 2 weeks. By the middle of June, it'll set some ground as to where it's going to be.
Yeah, so I mean, a producer, of course, can't control the weather, but I guess watching those trends can really impact how a producer what they're going to produce or plan for seed or I guess in finances.
Yeah, so I think what a producer needs to do in this situation is understand that there's two markets out there. So the futures market is more forward thinking. It sees the overall whole market, not just your localized area or even one province. It sees basically all of Western Canada. It really sees the whole world. And at any given time when that market is open, whatever the bias is of that moment, that is priced into the market. Whereas in the cash markets, where we're buying from a farmer, selling to a feedlot as just the easiest example, you may have a bias on that market, but I think we tend to forget that that's priced in almost immediately. That's how efficient the market is. It prices in the bullish news, the bearish news right away. So that's where it's at today.
All right. Well, thanks for the update. It's appreciated. And we'll talk again soon then, Jim.
Thanks, Cory. You take care.
Hey, thanks. So that is Jim Boozicum of Marketplace Commodities. Yes, of producers. I mean, it is the old days of a small facility and production are gone. You know, it takes a lot of skill, business planning, and work to make sure that you can maximize what you're doing. So check them out at marketplacecommodities.com. And there's certainly a lot they can offer there in what's obviously a fluid sort of market and business world. All right. Well, let's see what else we're going to get onto. I'm going to drop the bomb. I expect you to go to the Western Standard to get the details, of course. But Dave talked about that. Who was this celebrity at 83 who has knocked up a young lady? It's Al Pacino. And yes, his 28-year-old girlfriend is 8 months pregnant. I guess he's kept it secret for quite some time. So, speaking of some of the advantages of pharmaceuticals, I very much doubt that Mr. Pacino at that point, but who knows, maybe he's got some super virility, managed to pull that off without some sort of blue pill or something along the lines. And, it's along with his friend there, De Niro. I think he's 79, and he's got his young girlfriend with a bun in the oven as well. I'm sort of mixed with that, especially guys like De Niro likes taking the big compassionate left-wing caring thing and so on, and how the rest of us are all uncaring jerks. Well, whilst he's out there at, the age of pushing 80 and producing children, good on you, I guess, if you're getting the young ladies at that age. But how fair is it to the kid when your father, if they manage to live until your graduation, is going to be pushing 100? There's not going to be playing any ball in the backyard or, experiencing much. We've already got a society that's already suffering a lot from families that don't necessarily have parents. I mean, I guess these guys will certainly be able to pay the bills for them, but will they be able to present themselves as the father figures? Maybe just add a little to that blue pill and then throw a little something on the tip of that old thing before making more kids, guys. But whatever, it's their business, their bodies, their choices, and that's what those fellas did. I like Lisa Webster. Say hello to my little offspring. Ah, nice. So yes, if folks remember Scarface, that is a play on that portion there from that movie. Okay, so let's see what else we've got going on. It's not too much to cover. There's a lot more that I can't get into because it's just too big. We can't forget it's getting bigger and bigger with O'Toole now, the leader of the opposition. It's been confirmed that it seems that the Chinese Communist Party was most stuff we already knew in a sense, directly trying to interfere and make him lose the election. Again, Trudeau and his little lapdog Johnson are trying to whitewash this and cover it up. We just couldn't talk enough about it with what's left in the show today. I'll work on that a little more next week, because this is a huge issue in Canada, a massive one. And we can't let it get forgotten over the summer. Of course, there'll be lots more to cover and updates and things next week as well. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys. And we can finally start talking about stuff other than the provincial election for a while. But it'll still be a bunch of politics and me ranting and raving in future shows. So come in again next week at this time, and we will do it all over again. Thanks.
Here's an update on commodity prices in Lethbridge for today. Cash barley is down $2 at $4.03. Feed wheat is down $2 at $4.04. And corn is down $3 at $3.93 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, July Minneapolis futures are lower 11 3/4 cents at $7.81 per bushel, with local hard red spring bid for May movement at $10.47. Looking at canola, nearby futures dropped $7.60 at $6.50.60 per ton, with delivered values per June movement at $14.97 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentil prices are trading at 33 cents per pound, and yellow peas are holding at $11.25 per bushel. And in the cattle markets, August live cattle added 17.5 cents at $167.35 per hundredweight. For more information on pricing or picked up options, give me a call at 403-394-1711. I'm Matt Musicum at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.